Do you know what? I'm going to start by asking you what you think the stereotypes are of British Asian men. Shane, what are we stereotypically?
To who?
To our own, to people who are not Asian?
I think that's too broad to answer, to be honest.
Okay, well then answer... Good grief, jeez, it's not Jeremy Patchett. I mean, have an answer, will you? We're here to talk about being men, for crying out loud. Right, look, okay, Asians then. Gee, all right, your mum. Okay, there, stereotypes that your mum has about you. Right, okay, go on.
That's a whole different show, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, there you go. Okay, well, I'll give you one, right? Do you think it's fair that Asian men, especially by Asian women, are regarded to be mummy's boys?
Ooh.
It's a good question. I think, yes, partially. I come from a culture, I come from India originally, and I come from a culture in which the parent, the mother, is notoriously seen as God. And therefore my relationship to my mother is as a mother's boy. I got her back. She'll live with me when she's getting older, and I'll look after her. So yeah, I'm a mummy's boy, and therefore people are going to see me like that for real.
Sandeep? Stereotypes.
Yeah, I think your question is really pertinent about the mother. The mother in India has a very special role, and men are really celebrated. So when a boy is born, their parents will go out and go and get lots of sweets. We call them laddus, the round things that you get at weddings and whatnot. So they'll go around distributing those. If a girl is born, they'll just keep very quiet about it. It's a real tragedy in our community, and unfortunately, we've got a situation now. My grandfathers came from the Punjab region. It's quite a difficult thing where if a girl is born, they'd rather just kill her, and that's a really difficult
Punjab
situation.
has some of the highest rates of female feticide in India, doesn't it? If not the highest.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was here for Women of the World talk as well. Jude Kelly runs a session for women in breakfast, and she invited me and she said, why don't you talk about it? So I came and talked about it, and I went home and told my mum. I said, there was this talk, and I said, it's really sad about femicide and all that. And she said, well, you're lucky to be here, it's yourself. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, your grandmother, when she was born, they nearly killed her because they just couldn't afford it. It was really, really sad. So they stuffed her mouth with cotton. And the neighbor came around and they said, oh, what the hell are you doing? Take that out. And she survived. And because of that, I'm here. So sorry to start off on a really hard edge. But if you're talking about the role of men and women in our Asian society, boys
but the
are
stereotypes.
But that is a stereotype.
Yeah.
Even today now, you've got a new campaign which has just started called Pink Laddus, which is about when a woman is born in India, but also here now, they've started celebrating the birth of women by giving out laddus. The only difference is that they're pink. So I think it's difficult to unravel it. In a project in what we're talking about, because we've got so many other subjects to talk about.
Well, we do. Sanjay, you mixed parentage, and your mother is Indian, is that right?
Yeah.
So, and she's here, I believe. Right? She's here. Hello. You're a good-looking boy. You must be very proud. Stereotypes.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for me actually, because as you said, I'm mixed race, so stereotypes a lot of the time boil down to perception and other people's perception of you, and I think. For me, growing up with both an Indian heritage background, but also in a very much British and English family as well, and some of the schools I went to, I've kind of found it difficult to find where I necessarily fit. And I found myself getting stereotypes by sort of Caucasian or English people about what they might perceive of me.
Which was?
Being, pardon?
Which was?
So stereotypes of, well, I suppose stereotypes difficult, but I suppose experienced racism on, I suppose, indirect racism from people, from it being confused with the only other Asian boy in the class. Our names constantly getting mixed up just because he was called Deepak and I was called Sanjay.
They sound so similar as well, don't they?
And we looked absolutely nothing like each other, but getting confused. But then equally from the although I feel very deep rooted in my Asian culture, and I've been brought up in a way that has been, and kind of was going to classes. You know, Mum used to take me to classes at the Bhavan and like Hindi lessons and you know, celebrated Diwali and Rakhi and all of those things. Equally, then from Asian people thinking that I'm not a proper Asian, or I don't, you know, because I don't look very Asian, saying, "Oh, you don't look very Asian." It's like, "Oh, sorry about that." and so it's kind of I've kind of experienced stereotypes from both not being too Asian and maybe not being Asian enough.
Wow.
Like Goldilocks, Brownie locks. Can I interrupt?
You can.
Just to say that, don't you think stuff has changed in the last 30 years? I'm 44 now. When I was 7 or 8, it was a bit dark, to use a metaphor. But now things are a little bit more. It's a very mixed society that we live in, and I don't feel like we suffer. I think that the work that has been done in the last 30 years, particularly on a media level, including by people like yourself, has changed perception of who we are. So I no longer get typified as an Asian. No one would dare to kind of associate Asian men with the smell of, or Asian people with the smell of curry. That doesn't happen anymore.
But we live in a week where the Sun on Monday did a front page which stereotyped the whole Muslim community, saying 1 in 5 supports jihad in Syria, which is completely wrong.
Yeah.
So we live in also as well, because I host the show on the BBC Asia Network, there are still a lot of, don't get it twisted because we live in London, right?
Yeah.
There are lots of very segregated communities outside of the UK. You only have to go to places like Oldham and Bradford and places like that. As if, you know, for you, growing up, what were you expected to be as a Muslim Asian boy growing up?
I mean, this talk of stereotypes, you know, when I think of being a South Asian man, being a Muslim man, you know, we are like the protectors, the ones that provide for the families, the ones that are reliable, the heroes. You know, in Bollywood films, in dramas, we're always the ones that are sort of like fighting against society or fighting against adversity. And the women are the ones that are, you know, sort of there to sort of take care of the family and procreate, and the men are sort of like always the breadwinners. And you know, while I was growing up, you know, I come from a conservative Pakistani background. That was expected of me. That was really sort of it's not like it was said that's how you've got to be, but it's sort of like it was always ingrained. There was always a subconscious there that when I grow up, I've got to provide for the family. I just didn't realise I had to put on a dress and provide for the family.
Yeah, they're very accepting of that income that comes in via...
I mean, it's always an ongoing negotiation, but, you know, when they see...
Your parents are aware of what you do?
Yeah, they're totally aware. I'm totally out as a gay man, and I'm totally out as gender fluid, and I'm out as a drag queen as well. So my parents are, you know, there's nowhere to hide, basically.
Do you think that Asian men are more confined by a very narrow idea of masculinity than non-Asian men? And I say that because yesterday I had a very well-known DJ on my show, and I said, you know, what was it like growing up? What was your dad? And for people who are Punjabi, he just went, well, my dad was a Jat.
Yeah.
And that was supposed to mean everything, okay? Yeah. Now, for people that don't know, a Jat is a caste in Punjab, and it's a farmer caste, but they consider themselves to be the kind of top of the caste heap in the Punjab, and Jats will always go on about them being Jats. They're like kind of Man United fans. They're just obsessed with it, right? Yeah. So it was really interesting that he said that, and it was almost as if the Asian men, just from that alone, and I don't know if you're a Jat or whether you care about that at all, but being a Punjabi man, that very kind of clear, narrow definition of what a man is.
Yeah, it's your big, well-trained, masculine man. I actually don't believe in the caste system, and in our faith, we actually believe that there isn't any caste, but unfortunately, it's really heavily practiced, and that kind of determines how you are and how you behave. And I suppose in most families, your father is your role model. So it depends on his attitude and what you kind of see between your mum and dad, isn't it? And how you grow up.
But your father was a deeply spiritual man, a man that was classically trained and an amazing musician as well. So how did that
Well, he went through his own journey of finding the truth, and when we kind of grew up, he was out there enjoying his life, and then he had a transformative experience
Right.
when he met a spiritual person, and then he followed his life in a very different way.
Oh, okay.
And I suppose we kind of observed that, but in our family, we were allowed to do what we really wanted to do. And so we all found our own sort of way stumbling along. We were just talking to Shane earlier on. We grew up at a really interesting time in England, when you had all the big powerful speeches in Southall, and the crisis that existed, and the riots and everything.
Yeah.
So we kind of grew up in that. So it was a different testing time. So I think, with Shane's talking about now, things have changed. And sometimes I question, when we used to come out of school, we used to think, right, who are we having a fight with today on the way home? Who's going to pick on us? Is it going to be the National Front? Are we going to have an issue with the Black and Caribbeans? Or are the Black and Caribbeans and the Asians going to go and tackle the National Front? So we grew up in that sort of tension. So it wasn't very easy. But within that, I did see a lot of Sikh guys decide that they weren't going to wear a turban because it was just too complicated. For me, it was never a question. This is who I am. This was my identity, and I'm proud of it. So we just kind of battled on with whatever it was we went through. But now, recently, with what's going on with ISIS, I think there is a European crisis as well about identity. I think it got better. I think what Shane was saying, that it's better understood. I think that it had got better, but I think it's gone worse now. I was just in Italy a couple of weeks ago, and normally my kara goes off and I can't take it off, so in security I always get searched, get frisked. And this time I went through in Italy, and they took me down to the side, and they said, come on sir, can we just interview you? So I thought, all right, here we go. And but this time the guy said, look, we need you to remove your turban. And I said, well, I don't actually remove my turban. So I said, you can search me, we can touch it, whatever you want to do, get your scanners out. I said, what you really need is a mind scanner, but I don't think they kind of understood my joke. And
It's just to be clear, don't make jokes with those people. Unless you want a rubber glove treatment, don't make jokes with those people. They haven't got a very good sense of humour.
I know, but I don't think the guy actually understood a word I said, because he was proper Italian. And then so they brought their...
Couldn't speak English.
Yeah, they brought their supervisor in, and he said, yeah, just give him a search. So they didn't ask me to remove my turban. But that just kind of shows you where we stand with what's going on with the media, because there's no celebration of cultural diversity when that happens together. So the media won't report on anything good that's happening between communities, but the minute there's something else, they'll make documentaries or make outrageous programs.
Okay, I want to bring it back just for a second. I mean, Shane, about this idea of a narrow masculinity, that Asians, we as men are brought up to have a very clear definition of it, presumably from our fathers. Is that your experience?
No.
Okay, fine. You're allowed to disagree. It was a question.
Ask me a different question.
No, okay. All right then. What is your model of masculinity based on your father?
Wow, that's deep. We go Freudian.
Yeah.
Dad, Dad was a strong guy, and he worked with his hands, and he was an engineer, and I was a cerebral dude. So there wasn't any kind of handing on. There was a disconnect there. There was why can't you use your hands? All right, well, look, you just do whatever makes you happy. So it made me... I read a lot as a kid, so I was weird. I read a lot, and I felt kind of separate. My identity was separate from that, in fact, of Asians. I didn't feel like I was your archetypal coconut.
Because you read.
No, because I in my school the Asians all hung out together, and I had a problem with that. I had a problem with going, well, what about everyone else? I want to play with them. I want to play with them. I want to play with them. You're all my friends. So I had a problem with sticking to my own.
Sanjay, that seems a good place to bring you in.
Yeah, because I suppose when like I said, when I went to school, I was maybe one of a couple. I went to I went to a private school in South London, and it was predominantly white, and so I suppose for me, at school, I didn't really see it wasn't so clear cut about having the Asian English identity, because majority of people there were English anyway. So then when I went off to university in Manchester, what you did find there was you found that you'd have the groups of the white people would hang around, the black people would hang around together, the Asian people would hang around together, and you might have a little bit of, there might be the odd person in each of those groups who wasn't part of that, that race, but it wasn't as mixed up. So
where did you get your example of masculinity from? I mean, your dad is white,
yeah,
but presumably you had uncles who were Indian.
Yeah, absolutely. And my
and could you see a difference? I mean, thinking about it now, was there a difference?
So my dad's quite a sensitive soul, to be honest. So I think he wasn't necessarily. I wouldn't necessarily describe him as the most masculine of people. I think my Nunaji was quite masculine and had quite a strong idea of what boys should be like, I think. But actually, the way that my parents brought me up was to be who I wanted to be, and there wasn't a clear definition of that. So I suppose to give you an example, my mum was digging through some pictures the other day, and she found a picture of me stood on the climbing frame in the back garden wearing a dress, and I went down we went down to the shop one day, and there were these kind of like plastic high heels in a thing when I was about 6, and I said I want those, and she was like, all right, and I walked home in them. And that
Nunaji was horrified.
Yeah,
by this. Asif, and you, I mean, what was your model of masculinity growing? Was it very clear? Was your father, like Sanjay's, a sensitive type?
No, my father's a very strong man. He's very outspoken.
Does that mean you can't be both?
No, you can. But when you say sensitive, I mean I wouldn't necessarily identify my dad as sensitive. I always say that my dad's definitely strong, very opinionated, very what I would consider stereotypically Asian man. Very head of the family, very directorial is the word, I'd say.
Dictatorial.
That's the word.
Yes,
that's
yeah.
the word. So
Kim Jong-un,
my way or the highway kind of man. And that was my first introduction to masculinity. And if I look back at it now, has it impacted my life? Because I see myself as quite a strong man, and I think that strength has come from my dad, because I've had to really face challenges with my dad head on, and we're very sort of strong sort of men, and always sort of interacting with each other, challenging each other, pushing each other's boundaries. So I would say, I've got a challenging relationship with my dad, but it's a great relationship in the sense that I've got so much from my dad, so many skills and so much. What I am today, I don't think I'd be where I am today without the skills my dad taught me.
Is he aware of that? Have you told him that?
Do you know what? No, I haven't. I haven't actually. And
Why?
I think, do you know what? As Asian men, and I'm just throwing this out there, I don't think we talk to each other about our emotions as well as, stuff like this. I can say so
white men
easily
and
to
black
my
men
mum.
do talk about, because the whole point of being a man is that effectively none of us men are doing a particularly good job, because of course, as we all know, the highest killer of men under 40 is suicide. So
Yeah.
we're clearly not in the UK. So perhaps it's none of us men are.
I mean,
Can any of us here have or can go to our dads with an emotional issue? If we're feeling sad, I know your father, my father has passed away, I don't know anyone else's, but could you go to your dad with an emotional problem to say that you were sad?
do you know what? Not with, how can I say, I'd go with my sort of tail between my legs, if you like. I wouldn't go powerfully and say, Dad, this is going on, I'm dealing with this, I need help, I need your advice. It would be in a way that was like, I don't know, I'd put on a bit of like front and be like, Dad,
I need to sort shit out, Dad.
yeah, give me some money or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't ask me what it's for, but I'll give it back to you like when I can.
There's a classic Asian stereotype: throw money at a problem, it'll go away.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you have to be a mirror of your dad? So if he's strong and coming at you at that perspective, do you feel you have to
Yeah, I think sometimes I feel that's the only way I can get through to my dad is by mirroring him and being as strong as him, if not stronger, in order for him to get my point. Because if I go in there any weaker, then I feel that I won't get the result for myself and for the family.
Can I just ask one more question?
Yeah, of course.
Sorry. It's in our culture, there's this thing about disowning. If the parents aren't really happy, they just want to disown you. Did you have to face that?
Do you know what? Surprisingly, no. You would. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's been challenges, obviously, with me being gay, obviously. But I'm the only son in the family, and you would assume that, you know, my mum and dad would just be like, you know, you're out of the family, get out of the community. But that actually didn't happen with me. It happened sort of the opposite, where it was like, okay, let's try and contain this in the family. Let's not try and let the community know. Obviously, that changed once I became a public figure. But
Yeah.
I couldn't quite hide away.
Yeah.
But no, because ultimately I'm still their son, and although it's difficult and there's always challenges around, they still continue to have me as part of the family and part of their lives.
And I think just to kind of challenge a perception there as well is that I think there's a perception out there that in terms of sort of masculinity and being gay or coming out, that it's people go to me, oh, how did your family respond? And generally what they mean is, how did the Indian side of your family respond? Because that's who that people perceive would have an issue. And actually the Indian side of my family don't really care and hasn't really been bothered. It's actually been my dad, who's Catholic, who has had a harder time dealing with it. So I think that the idea of Asian masculinity or Asian men having more of an issue with those kind of ideas, because of the fact that they may get more, you know, some of the reactions might be stronger, or there might be, you know, some more high profile press stuff that's been about it. But actually, you know, it's something that's very much still there in other communities as well.
And that would surprise some people, equally with Asif, of course, the surprise that that your family didn't disown you, because I've heard of countless stories on my show over the years of people being disowned for marrying someone out of caste, marrying someone same caste but perhaps a different village somewhere. So we're always kind of looking for an excuse to divide ourselves. So that's a testament to your parents, really, actually, that they refused the way of not the culture, not the faith, but it's always the community.
Yeah, and you know, the word izzat, which, you know, translate to honor, is so dear to us and sort of ingrained in us, and we're always sort of fighting against sort of what's right for the family versus what's right for, you know, the community. And it's always a challenge. I'm not going to sit here and say it's easy, because it isn't at all, because, you know, you kind of have to think about not only your immediate family, you've got to think about the external family in the UK, then the family back home in Pakistan or India or wherever. Because as Asians, we're not individuals. You know, we think as an entire community. And that always, you know, that's always an ongoing negotiation, challenge and struggle that, you know, as an individual and as a family, we face day to day.
Can I
Yeah, of course, Shane. Yeah.
So that's the issue there. The fact that often, you know, I come from a village, and the village mentality has not left my culture. So that there's the idea of shame in the community. If you do something that's a little bit off kilter, such as coming out, then there's often the kind of, oh, what shame this is going to bring upon.
But what shame is attached to men in the Asian community? Because for women in the Asian community, who are more likely to self-harm than their white compatriots, more likely to commit suicide than their compatriots here in the UK, what is the shame associated that men can bring onto the family?
Mental health is a classic one. So it's very difficult for South Asian men. I think it's documented. It's very difficult for a man to tell his family that he has mental health issues, because.
But that's difficult for women too. I mean, that's not. I mean, I want to be specific about what are the pressure men, because we know. And it's been well documented, and it's been in fiction. I mean, Mira Sayal's Life Isn't All Ha Ha He He has wrote about it affecting women. But men, what concepts of shame, what pressures, extra pressures are there on Asian men Because an Asian woman has to be the perfect wife, perfect mother, perfect daughter-in-law, perfect aunt, perfect sister, all of these things. But what about us? Do we not have any of those pressures?
Well, I would say it's probably family to family. I think in our family, I've got 2 sisters and 1 brother. So we were brought up very, very equally. So if the boys weren't allowed to go out, the girls weren't allowed to go out. If the girls had to do housework, we had to do equal chores. So in our house, it was very much that. But there was this like you said, izzat and honor. That exists right across the culture.
But that's about men protecting women's honor. What about men's honor? What about the shame that men can bring?
Yeah, but that's what it is. So if, say, you're a man and your family unit does something that brings so-called dishonor on that family, that's what the man is worried about. So he doesn't want to be in that situation. So he's always telling the family that you must behave X, Y, and Z. You must marry this. You must marry that. So there's this ideal situation that they create. And then when that doesn't happen, then they feel damaged because they think, how am I going to go into society? How am I going to go to the Gurdwara?
So it's authority.
It's authority, yeah.
So, okay, so we have to have... Azim.
I was going to say, I think there's certain masculine traits that are attached to Asian men which put so much pressure on us. The main thing I think is money. Is literally providing money, being that figure in the household that will bring in the income, that will feed everyone, and that can be shown off to the rest of the community.
Okay.
Look how amazing my
So
son
it's not
is.
providing, it's flossing, essentially.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because, like, for example,
Okay.
you've got the whole, you know, you're talking about stereotypes before, and like the whole doctor or accountant or banker
Yeah.
stereotype.
Yeah.
And I
My
think
son,
that-
doctor.
Yeah, exactly.
My
And I
daughter,
think-
doctor.
And it is. I think it is a. I think a lot of people do feel that pressure that they have to go into a profession that's seen as worthy or seen as something that can be spoken about in a positive way, and actually going into something like the arts or being a drag queen might not be seen as such a worthy profession.
Yeah,
regardless of
I'm not
Certainly
sure. Yeah,
not.
My son, drag queen.
that's not a conversation I've ever had with an uncle at a wedding. It has to be said, my son, drag queen.
I mean, I'd say one thing that I do think that is changing a little bit. I mean, I've got friends who've sat down and in their families, they've like got 2 children and they've decided that the wife is going to go and earn because she's got the bigger earning capacity, and he's going to sit at home and he's going to look after the children. So I do know that this sort of thing is shifting today.
It is, but the question, and a personal one to everyone here, is being happy with your partner earning more money than you. Now, in a heterosexual sense, I've interviewed men who have a great issue with that. You know, who would feel that their masculinity is undermined and impugned by the fact that their wife, girlfriend is earning more money than them.
Dude, I earn so little money that if my partner came
So I'm not
home,
the tax man. You don't have to. You don't have to lie to me.
I'd be so happy. If she was like, oh man, I got a bonus here, I'd be like, yes!
Okay, so you married for money. You gold digger. You.
A joint account.
So that, in terms of your sense of masculinity, that is not in any way impugned or undermined by the fact that you earn less.
It's really good to think about kind of success, what success is in the 21st century, and how much your masculinity, if you like, is defined by that. We live in a world now where, you know, I feel successful being myself. And that's a long way to come for a South Asian man, because not only, you know, any diaspora kind of lands in a place, you know, what you earn is a symbol not only of your status, but how comfortable, how successful you feel as an individual. And luckily we're living in a pluralistic society where the choices that we make are such that I could be successful, if you like, you know, with the lowest paid job, just knowing that I was kind of calling myself. So I think that's changed a lot.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Do you think that the Asian community would still regard it as a success as long as you're happy? Like, really?
I think there's a small percentage that's doing that. I mean, yes, if
Right.
you go to a typical
Okay, there you go.
If you
That
go to
answers
a
that question,
typical Indian wedding, it's always a show of how many Mercedes and BMWs turn up in the car
Yes.
park,
Yeah.
and everyone's sort of sitting there taking a lot of time parking their special cars just so that they're seen. You know, so they're. You know, but I think that
I never knew
consumerist.
that was a thing. I always wondered, why the hell is this uncle's taking so long to park his Mercedes? It's because he wants all of us to see it. That's brilliant. Okay, I didn't know that. Yeah.
But I would say that, you know, that's now right across all the communities now, though. You know, this whole thing about consumerism and how we live a consumerist society.
But do we have added pressure on us, as Shane was pointing out, as members of a diaspora? The idea of the immigrant is that my kids will have to do better than me. I had to do better than my parents. And that is purely on a financial level. You know, if they had one property, we'll try and get two, and then our kids will have three. This is the kind of thing that's kind of drummed into us, isn't it?
Totally. I mean, I remember like when we used to go back to Pakistan as a family, we'd be shown off as the children from England. You know, as in these are the English Pakistani children. So because we're English, there's like all this, you know, we are somehow more successful. We're going to provide more money. We'll have more cars. So, you know, when you're talking about diaspora, it's not only to here, it's also back home. You know, there's that massive showcase of just because we are living in the UK, we've got access to all this, you know, consumerism, money, and wealth that we can show off everywhere. And of course that adds pressure, you know. God, whenever I used to go back to Pakistan, I would feel this, you know, oh, don't talk in Urdu, talk in English. Don't talk in Punjabi, talk in English. Because there's that whole, you know, there's a grandeur about it all. There's a massive grandeur about being a diaspora child.
Shane, same in Gujarat?
In Gujarat, everyone's in dhotis trying to be Gandhi, so it's different
This is the
kinds.
state of Narendra Modi. I think it's moved on a little bit since then.
I think I've got blinkers on.
Yeah, but this idea, because you were saying, look, I'm happy and that's successful. But do you think that actually your family feel the same way about that?
No, I mean, I think it's really interesting being aware of the fact that what goes on in my story, in my head, is my story, because, you know, definitely thinking about my family, my extended family, which, you know, the community, my Gujarati community, my caste, if you like, and beyond my caste, my community. Yeah, money is the most valuable commodity and asset. We came from poverty. There's a reason that we're in this country. There's obviously loads, but the primary one is financial. We came here for money. You know, my family brushed their teeth with a stick, famously. Even, you know, my dad's family. They
Sounds like this Monty Python sketch I once
Yeah.
saw. My family was so poor, we used to brush our teeth with stick. And, really?
That's how it is. Neem stick. I still do it, actually, which is probably why my breast stinks.
It's fine. So keeping it real then, you were growing up expected to earn good money. I mean, that was the idea.
That's why we're here, isn't it? We're here for the dollar. We came here for the...
Pound, darling, bond.
Thank you for anglicising.
I'd say it's a little bit more nuanced than that. I think it depends.
So what's the story from you then? I mean,
There was a big community that came in, say, from Uganda. They were refugees and brought in. So most of them came literally with a fiver in their pocket. And
But why here? We could have gone back. We could have gone to some poor country elsewhere. We came here. But why?
But I would say that money is one of them. But the other thing was education. There was this thing about, say, we came from the African route into England. Yeah, so there was a lot about that community that wanted to become very successful, and a lot of success did mean that, you know, it was about education. So in our family, it was definitely about education. We weren't expelled out of the country, but we just came out of choice. My father wanted us to be educated, so that was the reason we came in. But what's kind of probably interesting is that we were sort of the first big wave of immigrants, but now you've got a second and third generation of immigrants coming in. And what's interesting is probably how we view them. Because I remember, you know, growing up in Southall and different communities being brought into Southall, and we said, "Oh, what are they doing here?" You know.
yeah. Well, there were clashes between the Somali and Punjabi communities in Southall
hugely.
just some years ago. Sanjay?
Yeah, no, I very much agree with your point there on education. I think there's a big pressure about, you know, having to go down a certain educated route because potentially, you know, my mum's family came over from Kenya as well, I think seeing that there's the opportunity to have a fantastic education here, and therefore that is what you should go and do. And one of my cousins, after sort of 4 or 5 of my cousins had gone off to university, one of my cousins decided, no, actually university isn't for me. I want to go and be a chef. And it was definitely a topic of conversation for a good while. That Amit's not gone to university, and it was a big deal because one of my just because he purely decided that he wanted to follow his own path rather than go down this predefined route that maybe people had in their heads.
Do we then have an added pressure as ethnic minorities, as men? Because of course, as you were pointing out about being providers, but actually it's more than just being providers, because that's what a lot of men are brought up to be. It's about being successful providers. It's beyond just providing. It's beyond subsistence. It's beyond just putting a roof. It's having 2 roofs or 3 roofs. It's having the cars that you mentioned. Is there that?
Yeah, and I think there is this element of a kind of innate competitivism, and it kind of makes me think of that Goodness Gracious Me sketch where she's like, "But how big is his dunda?" and that way, you know, where they're one-upping everyone. Yeah. And there is, you know, I think there is an element there where we have, you know, there is pressure to achieve and be good at stuff. And I think, you know, going back to that internal happiness and what makes you happy. You know, I spent 6 years in banking because that was kind of.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, no, and that was the route. That was the route.
Sad. Yeah.
that was yeah. I've come out as a banker, and that was the route that I kind of saw as being success. But actually now, when I'm doing something, I've started setting up my own business, and I'm earning a hell of a lot of money, less money than I used to, but I'm a lot happier, and I kind of now deem I've got a different measure and a different bar of what success is.
Okay. Would you like to ask us some questions? Would you like to do that? Okay, well, let's start. It's a gentleman over there with the fine hair. You have very virile hair, sir. Do we need to get a microphone? Because I think we are recording this. So don't libel anyone, I guess. Or do, but give your name and address before you do it so we can send the lawyers directly to you. Sir. Give us your name as well.
Tyler.
Tyler.
Well, I lived in Upton Park for several years. When I think of Asian men, I don't picture sort of you guys. The way you have spoken to us today, I don't view you as, although with no offence intended, I don't view you as Asian men. You're just men to me. Okay. Do you think
I wish you'd been around in the 80s. You could talk some skinheads. That would have saved me a lot of shit in the 80s.
Your view of culture, your view of the problems that you've discussed today, to me, come across as a very sort of British Asian problem.
Yeah.
Do you think your problems still affect those that are, say, in other countries, say Pakistan, India, etc.? Because it's not. If I walk down Upton Park, the response I receive from Asian men there is very different, as would be with you. As you said, when you go back to Pakistan, you're treated very differently as to what...
right. Do you, Tyler, come across then a lot of Asian men who were not born here?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
I did. I was surrounded because I lived in Upton Park.
Yeah, I know.
It's a very sort of Asian community.
Yeah. So they would have had accents. They were born in Bangladesh or Pakistan.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And the way they are is very different.
Okay,
Very,
Sandy.
very
I think it's a good question.
Very good question.
And I think your question is about, is it just about the UK? But when you are in, say, somewhere like Europe, I definitely know what it feels like to be an animal in a zoo. Because wherever I walk around, I can feel eyes just looking at me. I've been to places like Russia and all that. And suddenly you know you're different and you'll get lots of eyes on you. So the challenges are on.
Can I pick up?
Yeah, of course.
Is it Tyler?
Yeah.
We're in a moderated conversation here. We're face to face and speaking. If I'm in Italy or Mexico or China, when I'm walking past people on the street, it's very difficult to measure what we're thinking of each other or how our body language, how our kind of street behaviour reacts to each other. If the men that you're talking about were on this stage, I'm sure that you, and able to speak to you, I'm sure that you would hear them and react to them and think of them in a different light, as I'm sure that they might hear and react and think of you in a different light. So, something to consider, I think.
Okay. Some more questions? Hands up. Okay, let's go with this gentleman here. And then I'd like to get some female voices. There are lots of men here as well, as you can understand. There's a lady at the back. So we'll go with this gentleman and then this lady there. Don't worry, we'll get to everyone, so we hope, with the glasses on. Okay.
Cool.
So, what's your name?
Assad, or
Hi, Assad.
Assad, if you're
Assad.
speaking in
Yeah.
Indian.
If you go and get
If you go and get it.
Or Alan, if you're like an English teacher who just can't say your name. Yeah.
My question, I'm going to make a statement and then ask the question out of it. And the statement is role models. And so the question that comes out of that is, I remember walking around Stratford last year, Westfield, looking at the billboards and saying, there's no brown faces on the billboards. The H&M, the Gaps, there's no brown faces. And then I think every time James Bond is up for renewal, they say there'll be a black James Bond. No one's ever said there'll be an Asian James Bond.
We're second in line to that crown, my friend.
But then when you...
Because we wouldn't have an Aston Martin, we'd have a BMW or a Mercedes,
yeah, just park it. That would be the film.
Exactly. Spend ages parking it.
But Q would have a field day. But the question is, if you look at Bollywood and how masculinity is portrayed in Bollywood, how does that translate for British Asians in the media? And how, like, you're a great example, but what about in the other world? And
well, none of us are hench, and the Bollywood thing with Salman Khan's arms and all this is about having. I mean, I barely have a 1-pack, let alone a 6-pack. So yeah, that's a really interesting point. Is an Asian man's masculinity seen not in kind of James Bond but Shah Rukh Khan? Is it Bollywood that has the biggest influence on us as men? As we all just jump into a dance routine, which I've choreographed beforehand. Yeah.
If I'm totally honest with you, no. I mean, yes, I love Bollywood and I watch Bollywood, and the actors and actresses look amazing, but I wouldn't say I'm necessarily sort of influenced by their looks as a man. I mean, when it comes to drag, I would love to look like Aishwarya Rai, but when it comes to a man, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, would I then go and look at, say, Zayn Malik and be influenced by him and want to look like him? Yes and no. But if I'm honest with you, no. I wouldn't really want to look like Salman Khan or Shah Rukh Khan.
And is there a distinction anyway? Like, so there might be a masculine image as part of Bollywood, but is that any different to the image that's portrayed by Hollywood? Exactly. And the kind of guys that you see in Hollywood, and why is there any difference?
Usually dressed worse. Just got to put it out there.
They are getting better, though.
You think?
Yeah.
All right. So thank you very much. It's a role models question. And does anyone here feel that Bollywood leading men are role models to British Asian men?
I like Amir Khan. Like, look
Yeah,
at what's
Amir
happened
Khan,
in the last
yeah,
week. The
yeah.
man's a dude.
Yeah.
He uses any platform he can to use his celebrity to talk about political issues.
Well, it was his wife, actually. That was actually his wife that started that conversation by saying that she felt that they could leave India because the state of tolerance in that country. And he reported that, and then he got into a load of trouble for that. Okay, yes.
Thank you. Political issues was actually what I wanted to talk about. There's a lot of men in Westminster, but they're almost all white, and there are very few Asian male politicians. So I wanted to ask, how well do you feel represented by the political process, and where do you find your voice?
It's not only the political...
You're asking some bloody good questions. Great. Yeah, and there's me just thinking you were paid to come here.
I'd say it's not only just the political situation. I think it's on every level.
But Sandeep, just to further your point, there is not a single Sikh MP. No one.
No.
Right? Now, and clearly as a Sikh, how do you feel about that?
In our community, we're a bit...
Do you need a Sikh to represent you in the House of Parliament?
I think it's needed. I think we just haven't succeeded yet. I think what happens at the moment in the Sikh community is that individually we're really brilliant. Put 10 of us together in a room to do anything intellectual, someone's going to walk out with a black eye. So unfortunately, we're in that situation.
Yeah, that's why there's only 8 Sikhs in this room and you. Yeah, we didn't want 10 in the room.
But answering your question, I think it's a really pertinent question. Our organisation is actually based in Leicester in the arts, and they've set up a cultural advisory panel, and in that room, I was the only what do you call black, Asian, and minority person there. So I feel a lot of pressure that I have to make sure that I stand up for all the communities. And I brought it up really strongly yesterday with the Lord Mayor in Leicester. And I think I came up with sort of a 10-point plan of why I think they needed to support the other communities, because in Leicester and Birmingham, they're the first sort of cities that are becoming sort of nearly 50% black and Asian and non-white. So I think there isn't enough representation, even in the arts in this country, because that's my sort of speciality. Even with the Arts Council, our constant battle is that why is it that we're left with the crumbs that are left on the table after the money's been distributed, and there are very few organisations that can do something solid. So going back, if that issue exists in the arts, and you elevate that up to sort of MP level, it's even more critical, because then if you don't have that representation, and you don't have someone speaking out for yourself in politics, then you're going to remain marginalised.
Okay, Sanjay, just also though, May this year was a record intake of BAME MPs, so progress is being made, as ever slow that it is. Sanjay?
Yeah, I think the question you asked, you framed it specifically around politics, but it's a massive issue across the board. And as I said, I was in banking, and again in banking with cultural diversity in the higher up and more senior roles. When I was in head office and working kind of with the senior teams, very, very few Asian people. When I was a branch manager, the majority of my cashiers and my personal bank advisors were Asian. And I think it's a wider piece around diversity and inclusion. We could sit here and debate all day as to there are lots and lots of reasons as to why we don't have more representation. And I think that the question is, how do we increase that representation across the board, and what do we need to do as a culture, and what changes need to be made to be able to get a more diverse set of MPs across every type of diversity area?
Has the BBC changed?
Go on.
Sorry.
Go on, yeah.
Tell me about BBC. I mean, Lenny Henry last 2 years ago went off, and because of it, there was a lot of activity there, and a lot of positive activity. Do you feel that the BBC is changing?
Well, weirdly enough, I actually sit on the diversity board that the Director General has put together, and Lenny Henry is on that board with me, and they are making changes because Tony Hall, the Director General of the BBC, I went Bathing Ape Man. I was going to get you. Yeah, I was going to get you to. Well, I asked the question, so fair enough. Yeah, that's all right. We'll come back. We'll come to you in a minute. It's fine. And he genuinely believes in it, and he also believes that. We've been talking about this for too long, and it's all a bit boring, because actually what ethnic minorities want is just to be treated equally. You don't want special treatment. If we don't want rubbish ethnic minority people in jobs of power because they're brown or because they're black, and the same women don't want it just because it's women for the sake of it, but we want to be just a level playing field. That's kind of all we're asking for. And the BBC, clearly there's various. One thing that Tony Hall identified was leadership positions. So it's this exactly the thing. And one thing Lenny Henry said to me was, we don't want to be the kids at the kids' table when the grown-ups are at the dinner table. We just all want to sit around the table. And that's actually being implemented. So I met a young British African guy the other day who is going on to a 6-month CLAW leadership, paid for by the BBC. And he's just been shadowing Tim Davey, who's the head of BBC Worldwide. He's now come over into, I think, business development head of. He's shadowing the head of business development. So it's about preparing people to be at the top table, and be involved in the decision-making process. And that's ultimately what we can do. And look, I was 12 years on Radio 1. I do 5 Live, I do Radio 2, and I do the BBC Asia Network. So BBC's kind of putting me about. Obviously, I'm just a token. Political correctness gone mad whenever I get a job outside of the Asian sphere. Right, Mr. Koff.
Can I just say something?
Yes, go on.
What you say about the BBC is true, that they are making strides, and the same is happening with Sky, the competitors, because they're putting it out that they want diversity out there. But there's still challenges. For example, our challenge is, how do we get the BBC? They have the Proms, massive event. And we've been knocking on their door for years saying, give us one evening, let us do a...
But the BBC Asia Network just did its first prom from the Royal Albert Hall.
Yeah.
For the first, that happened. So, and it was a huge event. It was sold out. Benny Dial. It was Naughty Boy. It was a very successful as part of the Proms program. So,
But it's still difficult. I mean, you look
Well,
at the
yeah.
representation of, even if you get one event in, should we be happy with that?
no, of course not. No, but
We want the
we
whole
also
thing.
have to recognise progress, as well.
Yeah.
So, microphone for a gentleman who has now had a glass of. This gentleman here, in the bathing ape coat.
I just wanted to ask, because you didn't touch too much on the historical relations between Britain and the Indo-Asian subcontinent, and I just thought maybe I don't want it to come
In the
across.
context of masculinity, though, and
I don't want it to come across like a statement, but maybe like promoting or education around kind of the involvement in World War I and World War II, which were obviously Indo-Asian men. That could actually promote tolerance in the country and actually stamp out racism if people knew about history like that.
Couldn't agree
and
more.
just wanted to ask your thoughts on that. But just also wanted to find out which ones of you, I guess, have children or godchildren or young nieces and nephews, and kind of what you hope for them as being British Asians.
All right,
I guess if you want to focus on men, then
No,
then the
that's-
boys.
no,
Then
but I think
if you got
a
young,
man, kind of that authority, whether it be nieces, nephews, interesting as a.
I mean, we talk so extensively about money, we totally forgot about the children. I think there's a lot of pressure for British Asian men to have children. And, going back to your question, what would I like to see? Oh, I could give you the whole political correctness about creating a Britain that's diverse and yada, yada, yada. And I'm not saying I don't want that. But
That'd be amazing if you stood up here and went, no, I don't want that.
But
That'd be brilliant.
I just want, what do I want for my children, and I don't have children. I'd love to have children, within the next 10 years, not right now. But when I look at my nephews and my cousins' children, what I see at the moment is a lot of uncertainty as to who they are. And I think with the way Britain is right now and with the way Europe is right now, I think the younger generation is actually constantly being challenged, especially British Muslim and British Asians, as to who they are, where they fit in,
How loyal we are.
how loyal we are to Britain, rise of conservatism. I think there's, and we're sort of, where I am right now, I'm always having these constant, conversations with the younger generation about just being themselves. So that's sort of where I'm at with the next generation is, sort of supporting them in just being whatever they want to be without sort of pigeonholing them into certain tick boxes.
Okay.
Do you think it would be bad if they kind of lost track of the real tradition?
Sorry, do you want to ask that again? Sorry, because we're going to.
Do you think if it would be bad if they lost track of the really traditional aspects of Indo-Asian culture and became? Do you think that's a bad thing if they became too Western or too English, or do you not mind, or
Well,
you don't think
Sanjay,
it matters?
It's a good question for Sanjay to ask, because you've seen both of those cultures. So presumably when your mother married someone who wasn't Indian, I'm sure she had to face those kinds of questions and a revolutionary trailblazer. I think a round of applause for Sanjay tonight. Can't have been easy. Can't have been easy to be in a mixed relationship. That it's not easy now for Asians, let alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's that was certainly a challenge sort of 28 years ago and 30 years ago. But I think, for me, I very much feel like I've been brought up in quite a British environment and a British way, and that's kind of how it's been. However, I feel very, very, very in touch with the facts and the way that I've been brought up. I understand my Indian heritage and I have my Indian heritage, and I wouldn't want it. I'd hate for me to be in such a British environment that I didn't understand where the roots and where I've come from and that background. And
Would you describe yourself as Asian? Someone asked you, would you? Because it's interesting, mixed race, black and white, the ones I've known throughout my life, and if you see in the media, tend to identify more with being black than they do with being white.
I very much identify as being mixed race. And I wouldn't say. I say we're talking on the British Asian men panel, but I would also call myself an Indian English man as well.
Right.
And I wouldn't go on one or the other. I'm very
Right.
much a mix of the two.
And why should you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
Why should
and
you?
it's that's the thing, and I think it's about. I think if people are growing up in England, then I think they should be feeling like they're part of English culture, but absolutely not losing that identity, and that identity to me is so important to have, and I think it shaped me as an individual.
Sandy?
I think maybe it's when you look at a history, I think your point about World War I and World War II is really important. But just to answer that question, I know a number of people that are doing work to get out projects this year about the Save the Sea contribution. I was speaking to someone yesterday, someone's doing a project around the Muslim community being in World War I and World War II. And I think the more that's expressed, the better it is. And on Facebook yesterday, I saw a picture of Muslim American soldiers praying, and they were saying if only the Americans knew that some of our army actually consists of Muslims, there'd be better understanding rather than just tainting them. So I think there is that element. But in terms of holding back on your tradition, our family came sort of from Africa, so there was this thing. So when my grandfathers left from India, they held on to those values, and they held them in Kenya. India carried on moving on. We still held those values. Came to England. We still held on to those values. India progressed. You go back to India now, they look at you and think, my God, you're living in the dark ages, because we are still holding on to those values. But there is a generation now that's questioning everything. Say, for example, weddings. You go to a wedding place, and then mum will come out, pour some oil on it. And then one person said, do you know why you put that oil on? At your homes, do you know, any of you?
No.
You know, at weddings? So it's a big custom that they do. But the reason is, back in India, you'd live in the village and you'd always use the back door or a route into your house. So you never use the front door. And so when you did have an auspicious wedding or something like that, you'd go and oil it. And that tradition still carries on today. So you get mothers running around with oil, still putting it there, thinking, we've got to let our guests in. So there are, you have to think, what traditions are we keeping? But I think there are some people now that are starting to think, well, I want to lose them. But whether losing them makes you more British, I don't know.
Okay, Shane?
Just to pick up on the war thing. Masculinity has always been associated with men as warriors. Personally, South Asian or not, I want to cultivate a new kind of masculinity where, beyond where we come from, we learn to be softer, we learn to listen, and we learn to be more peaceful. So, yes, the warrior is a wonderful archetype for contemporary masculinity, but at the same time, I think I want to learn how to just be softer and kinder, and I think that in itself is a good shift for the notion of contemporary masculinity.
Okay, right, wow. Let's go to this gentleman at the back, because he was holding his hand up, one of the very first, but don't worry, we'll get round, don't worry.
Hi, I asked this question as someone who works for one of the major national tabloids. I'm not going to say which one, but...
Is it The Sun?
But first of all, I would like to ask...
You can't just say that and not tell us what it is. I mean, dude, come on, man.
If the media...
He said he was a banker. If he can say that, you can say.
Okay, I'll wait for the answers, then I'll tell you.
Okay.
Good. First of all, do you think the media is doing a very poor job of distinguishing British Muslims from British Asians? And two, and second, with all this talk about terrorism and jihad and what have you, is that really like the predominant issue when you guys get together on whatever social places you hang out? Is it really your main concern, or are we like exaggerating this?
I never stop talking about that with my mates. I mean, God, did you see that terrorist stuff? Wow.
But first of all, you've made the assumption British Muslims and British Asians, when to me, that is a classic trick of the tabloid journalism by saying terrorists are British Muslims. That's messed up thinking from my perspective.
Yeah. But also, just to be fair, there are Asians, for instance, there's a Sikh chapter of the English Defence League. because they are sharing a hatred of Muslims. And so it's not. We like to blame the media for a lot of things, but actually the Sikh Muslim enmity goes back centuries, and it's just being exploited.
But I don't necessarily think it matters whether they're making a distinction between British Muslims and British Asians, because regardless of that, what they're saying is complete bollocks. It's kind of, that regardless of whether it's, they're making generalisations about groups of people based on the actions of a few, and I don't think it matters how they're categorising those people. It's just wrong. Full stop.
Well, we don't know. There was a shooting at a family planning clinic in Colorado, which you may be aware of. Now, could we make an assumption that could be a Christian terrorist who's done that? And yet nowhere in the news have I even seen a mention that religion could be involved in that. Now, we don't know enough about the story yet. Me as a BBC journalist, we don't know enough about it. But if it came out that there was a Christian fundamentalist, would they call it Christian terrorism? Does anyone think they would? Right. So, well, that answers that particular question. Okay, so, okay. Are we? How many more? Oh, really? Oh, yes, good reminder. What's the paper?
As a freelancer.
Oh, wow, you're really trying. Jeez, you're so proud of your job. I love this. Oh, freelancer. Yeah, go on.
No, the Daily Express.
Okay, the thinking racists paper. Brilliant. Wow. Wow, that's amazing. How long have you been there?
2 months.
2 months. And honestly, how do you find it?
I got to say, most of the people I work with, 20-something-year-olds, hipsters from
really? Is that now a hipster job?
Well, you got to do what you got to do to pay the bills. But we don't really believe in
in your own
stuff
front
we
page.
write. I don't believe in what I write. I have bills to pay.
Oh,
I really don't.
You know this is being filmed, right?
Sorry.
That's actually amazing.
But
so
I'm a trained.
You've been there for 2 months. You don't believe in what you write?
No. I'm a journalist.
That's not fair. I mean, that's.
I have a blog, and if I want to, feel passionate, if I write about stuff in my blog that I feel really passionate about, and that's where the space I have.
What's your blog called?
It's a really recent blog, so.
I'd be really interested because I'd like to read what you feel. Because I now know that if I read it in a paper, it's not what you feel. So I'd like to know what you feel. So what's the blog called?
It's called Look. Just
Look?
Yeah, just the word Look.
I'm going to find that blog Look on Google, and that's going to come up.
WordPress.
Nihal's after your Twitter account.
Yeah. Or why don't you tweet? I'm the real Nihal on Twitter. Tweet me a link to it if you could. Is that cool?
Yeah, sure. But I just want to say that there's this perception of, and the tabloids are horrible, but the people that actually work for them, we are professionals, and we get paid to write. Just like lawyers represent criminals.
But what about if the stuff that you write is damaging? So if regardless, if
like
you,
Tim
even
Newton
if
Dunn in the Sun.
But I think as a reader and as a thinking person, you got to use your common sense and discernment to actually. This stuff is bullshit.
I think that's a good point. I think that's a good point. We can't just as sentient human beings go, well, the sun says it, therefore it must be. I mean, you got to think a bit, haven't you? You got to think a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, agreed. Millions of people are buying it. I mean,
and that's exactly the problem, that millions are buying it.
Well, maybe we should all buy it to challenge our own opinions about the world there, because you bunch of lefty pinko liberals. Okay, this guy with the glasses is the last one, unfortunately. But you know what? We're going to be hanging around a bit, so come and talk to us. Sir?
It's either a really complicated or really simple question, but I just wanted to ask.
Hugh. Hello.
Hello, mate.
Yeah.
I don't know why you didn't recognise me.
Oh, you all look the same to me, you brown people. I'm really sorry. Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
Cheers, Hugh.
You recognise my voice?
I do, totally, yeah. 5 Live and BBC.
Yeah,
great to see you.
I wanted to ask if you feel understood in British society, because I grew up in northwest London. There's so many different types of Asian people there, and when I was a kid, everyone was Asian. But now I'm older. I've got Christian friends from Sri Lanka, Buddhist friends from Sri Lanka, Muslim friends from Sri Lanka. There's so many, like you mentioned Punjab, you mentioned Gujarat, you mentioned castes. If you're not Asian, there are so many different types of Asian people. I just, what I'm asking is basically, it's called being an Asian man. Do you feel as if it's a positive or a negative to be grouped together, given your backgrounds can be so different?
Well, considering, ISIS, grooming, etc., etc., etc. Shane, what do you think of that?
It's a really good question.
It's a fantastic question.
As a 45-year-old man...
You were 44 a little while ago. When we started...
Just about 3 minutes
Happy
ago.
birthday! What happens at midnight?
I forget my age. I lie about my age. It's a beautiful question. As I'm now settled in the answer to that question, which is my roots and tradition is so valuable to me, and at the same time, I live in a profligate society in which everybody deserves and needs to be recognised. So yes, it's wonderful that I'm a Gujarati man with Kenyan roots, born in London, but yes, it's wonderful that all of you are not. And your cultures are as important to me as mine is. It's great that I have a platform to explore my own traditions and my own voice, but we live in a profligate society where we're all equal and all of those voices need to be valued. So my voice is being valued less and less because there's more of other people. There's less of a platform for the Asian underground. I don't mind about that. I'm down for the Azerbaijani transsexual underground. I need those voices to come to the table and represent because we're a pluralistic society.
Sandeep?
I'd say we're not understood. I think if you live in London, it's a little bit better because you've got a more cosmopolitan place, a multicultural place. You go to Birmingham and you go to a couple of other cities, it's a little bit the same. The minute you go outside of those places, you're not really understood at all. So I think there's a lot to be done yet. So I think I'd say no.
Sanjay?
I'm the gay only child son of an English Catholic father and a Hindu mother. I barely understand myself, let alone expecting other people to. But I think you raise a really good point in that, from speaking, all of us have got very, very different backgrounds, and it's difficult to then group. You're never going to find it, but equally, like you would find, English people, they're going to have, if you pick 4 English people, their backgrounds might be very different and their experiences might be very different. But I think it helps to have that grouping to be able to, because there's kind of unity in numbers that helps raise these issues to the fore. And so by doing that grouping, we're able to come and have this kind of discussion, which might not be possible otherwise.
Azim?
I feel understood because I've chosen to raise my voice and I've chosen to speak out. And sometimes I feel that, from the British Asian community, we probably don't do that enough. And I'm probably, being radical in saying that. And people can say that maybe we aren't given the platform to actually speak out in a manner that we want to speak out in. So I feel understood because I've chosen to speak out and I'm comfortable speaking out. And at the same time, I'm happy being grouped with other South Asian men because that's what I feel comfortable in identifying as part of my identity. I identify as British, Asian, Pakistani, gay, whatever, multifaceted identities. So that's how I sit on the matter.
Brilliant. Well, look, that's all we've got. Hugh, you want to... do you know what? I grew up in a village in Essex, the only brown boy in the village, pretty much. I'm British, Essex, Sri Lankan, Asian.
Anyone I know from Essex.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, that's So I'm the Asian thing. I think is strength in numbers, because I think one of the saddest things to happen to the Asian community is the fact that it is actually splitting apart. And it is splitting apart in quite negative ways where people are going, oh, well, the groomers, that's not us, that's their lot. And actually, we had people to battle in the 70s and the 80s, and they were skinheads and racists, which were very apparent. Those people haven't disappeared, but they're not as out there as they once were. And we are now fragmenting. And I see amongst the Black Caribbean and African community a lot more unity, I think, than I see in the Asian community. And I think that's getting worse. And the statistics are also showing that young British Asians are becoming actually more clannish. They're not mixing, they're integrating less, which is actually a very, very disturbing thing to happen. And one of the things that newspapers are doing and buying into that whole kind of Islamophobic thing is many in the Muslim community are retrenching. They are kind of strengthening numbers, as indeed they need to, because of the feeling that they are under attack in this country. And that worries me greatly, because I have friends, I'm Sri Lankan Sinhalese Buddhist. I will not, there's no one I like better because they're any of those things. I like them because they treat me how I want to be treated, and I treat them how I want to be treated, and that's how it should be. We're very good as Asians as putting up artificial constructs like caste to kind of get in the way of things, and I'm very proud to say I'm part of the Asian community. Very proud of that. Anyway, we've vote for me on. I'll have a dream. Right. Okay. Now, thank you very much indeed to Shane, Sandip, Sanjay, and Azif for coming in today. It's been absolutely fantastic.